Hello, in this video we will discuss about the fever. Fever is also known as pyrexia or hyperthermia. Hyper mean more, thermia mean the temperature. So the simply we can say the fever is the mechanism in which pyrogens produces will rise temperature between normal temperature 37 degrees Celsius is the normal temperature, while during the fever the temperature will be rise 38 to 40 degrees Celsius. So in this way that basically the high there are a lot of pyrogens, but in this video we will just understand a little bit about the pyrogens. So the pyrogen is that substance which that stimulate the fever. So the fever can be endogenous or exogenous stimulates. So for example, the endogenous mean inside of the body will stimulate the fever, while the exogenous means the fungi or the bacteria and virus which that will stimulate. So let's begin to understand first the synthesis of pyrogens. So the response to exogenous or endogenous response, bacterial, fungal infection or cell inflammation, which that will lead to pyrogens synthesis will lead to cause fever. So the fever will be basically we will understand from liver. This is a liver contain hepatocyte, Kupffer cell, and Langerhans cell, and there are a lot of cells. And basically the Kupffer cell, which that will be target the bacteria to the Kupffer cell. After the Kupffer cell, the target and the lipopolysaccharide. This lipopolysaccharide and bacteria, which that is basically the will stimulate will produce the prostaglandin E2. This substance will target to the brain. So remember, this is the blood circulatory system, and when entered into the prostaglandin E2 into the blood circulatory system, will target to the pre-optic target to the thalamus, and when target to the thalamus through a nerves when bind with a neuron will this PGE2 will target to the pre-optic area of hypothalamus. So after this, here is the basically is the I am drawing the general structure of the cell. So the bacteria is basically the exogenous bacteria will cause and lipopolysaccharide, which that will lead to stimulate the pyrogenic ceramide. This pyrogenic ceramide is basically will target to again go into the blood circulatory system and target same into the thalamus, hypothalamus to the pre-optic area of hypothalamus. So it is also lead to trigger the immune cell due to the inflammation. So this gives the response and recruitment of the produce cytokines, and cytokines will recruitment of the lymphocytes. So the macrophage as well as the monocyte, and there are a lot of innate and adaptive immune response. So this is the brain. This brain is basically, you can see in this diagram, that is the blood vessel. So when go into the brain, so let's begin to understand this is the endothelial cell of the blood circulatory system. So first of all, we should need to understand this is the when go, and for example the different type of cells, but here is the blood circulatory cell contains cell, endothelial cell contain nucleus. So in this way, how to synthesize the prostaglandin E2? So interleukin 1 beta, interleukin 6, and tumor necrosis factor alpha. This is the endogenous, remember, and this is the endogenous. And lipopolysaccharide is also stimulate this inflammatory response. And this is the exogenous lipopolysaccharide, while this is the endogenous, the interleukin 1 beta, interleukin, and tumor necrosis factor, which that will stimulate the arachidonic acid, and this arachidonic acid in the presence of cyclooxygenase enzyme will lead to prostaglandin E2 production, will lead to pre-optic area of the brain will stimulate. After this stimulation, let's begin to understand the pre-optic area of brain. So this is the pre-optic area of brain contain nerves, the neurons, and this neuron will target with the receptor EP3 prostaglandin EP3 receptor will bind with the prostaglandin E2, and this is the pyrogen. And when bind, it will be bind, and it basically stimulate the different muscle contraction and the shivering of the muscle, as well as the brown adipose tissue used for the production of heat. While on the other hand, it is also lead to vasoconstriction. Vasculature heat dissipation will decrease. It means the heat will not radiate. Basically, heat can radiate, but it will not sweat. So that is why the temperature will be high, because the blood vessel constriction will lead to not heat move over the skin. So in this way, when not go near the skin, so the evaporation will impossible. So that is why the heat will inside will be more, while the outer region of the skin, for example the peripheral part, will lead to sense the more coldness. So that is why the heat rise in core body temperature, basically CBT. So in this way, this is due to the prostaglandin E2 binding with the EP3, also with the nerves, will lead to stimulate there are a lot of things, and also this prostaglandin will lead to bind with the muscle. And this basically exogenous, endogenous pyrogens, for example, this can be lipopolysaccharide is the exogenous, while the inflammatory mediator is the endogenous. So let's begin to understand the mechanism. So this is the basically the hypothalamus, which that contain nerves, neurons, which that will balance and homeostasis for the heat, homeostasis, the temperature. So here is the temperature went down, so will positive feedback will stimulate, and the pyrogen will more stimulate the positive feedback to increase the temperature, while here is the temperature rise when 38 degrees Celsius for homeostasis. So this range, it will be inhibit for the decreasing of the heat, but the pyrogen will inhibit this function, and in this way the pyrogen will be inhibit the negative feedback, will lead to increase the temperature 40 degrees Celsius even. So in this way, the stimulate the temperature, and in this way the 39 degrees Celsius to 40 degrees Celsius temperature rise, and the shivering or cold feeling will be occur, because the cold feeling is due to the temperature require more. So in this way the pyrogen will stimulate for production of more heat. Why? Because the bacterial infection will work in the normal temperature, so our body will learn to increase the body temperature for killing that bacteria. So the stimulation of neuron to positive feed to maintain the temperature our set continuously will temperature down to increase more. So that is why the pyrogen is vary, as well as the pyrogen is used for the vasoconstriction. Also production of histamine, we will not understand about the histamine, but you should need to understand histamine is also used for the vasoconstriction. So here is the aspirin, which that is aspirin, is the non-steroidal drug, and as a NSAIDs you can say that, and which that will be inhibit the pyrogenesis, and due to the cyclooxygenase enzyme activity will be inhibit. While the cause of pyrogenesis is heat exhaustion, infection, and the bacterial or viral or fungal infection. So the bacterial infection, viral infection, or fungal infection will lead to cause the inflammation, and this inflammation is the exogenous. And because the bacteria contain lipopolysaccharide, and there are a lot of things, while the injury of cells and tumor form, stress, inflammation, and abnormal cells, massive apoptosis and necrosis, and chemical and indirect diseases, which that will lead to cause of pyrogenesis. Pyrogenesis means the production of the fever, the increase of the fever, the process of in fever. While the risk factor during pyrexia, or we can say this is pyrexia or pyrogenesis. So a risk factor is the tachycardia, mean the irregular heartbeat, hypoxia, mean the decrease of oxygen, and anaerobic respiration will lead to cause acidosis, and due to enzyme in mitochondria will not work. So that is why the anaerobic respiration glycolysis will lead to lactic acid fermentation, and this lactic acid will lead to acidosis and the weight loss due to brown adipose tissue loss and muscle loss, appetite loss due to the enzyme will not work. High temperature lead to non-functional body and lead to death and sepsis. Anyhow, let's begin to understand the type of fever, and we will understand with a different video to understand one by one the type of fever with explanation, but in this way you can understand the name. So intermittent fever is basically 37 degrees Celsius to 39 degrees Celsius within the day will change. So within the day multiple changes again and again. That is why intermittent. And the sudden high fever, which that will lead to dengue infection. And the continuous fever is basically continuous can be the pneumonia, urinary tract infection, which that will lead to continuous fever. And on the other hand, this continuous fever is typhoid fever and bacterial infection, and the remittent fever is 1 degree Celsius variable bacterial fever. This is, and on the other hand, the infection like brucellosis, inflammation in heat, and this is the type of remittent fever. And rheumatic fever is basically streptococcal bacteria, and this is the painful fever. So thanks for watching. Please make sure to subscribe and give the support.